Hi, everybody. Welcome to the FinOps on Azure podcast. It's Mike Stevenson here. And this week I've asked Jez back to join me. So Jez is really big in the FinOps community. A few weeks ago, we had a really good chat about doing a podcast. And I'm really pleased to have you join us here, Jez, today. So thank you for that.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. For anybody who hasn't met you before, can you just tell people a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Jez Back. I'm a cloud economist. I'm also a certified FinOps professional, which is a wonderful course. There's about 300, 400 around the world. I was on the first cohort, so it was a mad race between me and a couple of other really good colleagues who'd be the first one to get there. So that was jolly good fun. I've been doing cloud economics for about 11 years. So that's before FinOps became FinOps. And my journey has seen me run my own small FinOps business and working in Big Four consulting, as well as now, where I'm in Capgemini Invent as part of the cloud economics team, as part of our consulting and advisory team.
Whereabouts are you from in the country, Jez, as well?
Oh, well, that's the thing. I live in Devon, so it's a bit of a schlep up to the big smoke when I need to, but it's nice out here.
Especially you and I are kind of at opposite ends of the country, really, then, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. But it means that you get the nice peaceful parts when you get the opportunity to get away from work.
Yeah. So I think I'll just tell everybody on the audience the little story here. So Jez and I had a great chat a few weeks ago and had all these ideas about what we were going to chat about, and then Copilot search can't find the notes of what I wrote down. So we had a quick chat now, and we're like, what are we going to talk about? So Jez said, what is the cost of a click? Which I think is a really good kind of tagline, and we're basically going to just talk about this idea, Jez, aren't we? So I think from my perspective, tell me, what is the cost of a click?
Yeah, so the whole point about the question is actually for us to think beyond pure technology. So, what's the cost of a click from a cost standpoint, money, from a sustainability perspective, carbon, water, all of those types of things, but also in terms about the value that is being generated inside of the business. And everything's about trade-offs. Those people who are familiar with FinOps will know that everything is a trade-off when it comes to FinOps. And actually, if you think about it in terms of architecture and DevOps, everything's a trade-off in there as well. But what we've got to start thinking about is in this world in which we're living in, where there is massive compression on budgets, businesses are facing huge economic headwinds, there's lots and lots of pressure on IT leadership to minimize their in-year spend, but also to bring greater business efficiency through technology in the organization is a real challenge, right? Because you've got this juxtaposition of, well, spend less, but give me more. But you've got CIOs, CTOs, heads of IT who have been living with a flat IT budget since the pandemic. I know that's a long time ago, or feels like a long time ago.
Yeah.
There it goes. It still sticks there. Yet those on-demand technology bills are going up. And what do I mean by on-demand technology bills? Right? So anything that is consumption-based, public cloud, with all the hyperscalers, SaaS, AI, especially AI on cloud, right? All these things are spent immediately. And so as a result, that in-year spend, that immediate consumption spend is going straight onto the in-year budget or OPEX spend. Now, that causes a real tension between organizations because everything we do, right? Organizations rely more and more on technology. We talk about the technology-enabled business and all of that sort of stuff. But now with technology suppliers moving more and more on their delivery model to that on-demand basis, that subscription-based model, that consumption-based model, right? That means that technology spend is shifting from CapEx to OPEX. So if you've got this bill that is sitting there and it's going to go up, right? Let's just talk about cloud. The cloud bill is always going to go up. So the question we've got to ask ourselves is, what's the value that's being brought from it? Because if the bill's going up, are we driving better revenue if you're in a private sector organization or financial services? Or are we delivering better features and outcomes if you're in a public sector organization? But is the cost of that technology bill going up at a slower rate than it is in terms of the revenue or the system outcome we're talking about? Now, the reality is that when stuff is going from CapEx to OPEX, it creates three key challenges in my mind. Sticking with cloud, everyone is now a buyer, right? Everybody out there, from the lowest developer or junior engineer, right? Every time they click and they deploy an instance, they've just made a buying decision. But it's not necessarily that IT is the person who's getting the benefits of that. More often than not, it's the business that gets the benefit. So when you're creating these business cases for deploying new technologies, for deploying new services out there, IT are really struggling to say, well, here's my benefits profile from an IT perspective. Because actually a lot of this stuff in that technology-enabled business is the business that's getting the benefit. So we need to talk about that cultural shift between cost and carbon consciousness. So that's a really, really important point, right? Is carbon consciousness needs to feature in this. Net zero, well, I say net zero, carbon reduction, is a really big thing. And in those buying decisions that are being made, we need to shift that left, right? We need architects to be thinking about this beginning. We need SREs and devs to be thinking about this and stuff before they deploy it. And that's going to be shift down right down to the lowest level of the organization. And that creates a massive challenge in the norms of traditional ways of governance. So I think that was and governance needs to change. That's a big thing, right?
I think that was a really interesting. There's a couple of notes I made on a couple of points you said, actually. I think that were really telling, where you said every time the developer makes a click in cloud, they're effectively making a buy-in decision. I think that's really massive for me, because I think probably 95% of developers don't think that they're making a buy-in decision when they actually click to create that new resource, do they? And I think that's really a kind of an education piece, isn't it, where we need widespread education across the developer community about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I mean, I kind of feel for developers on this. If you look back on your own technology career and your technology journey, at what stage did someone take you to one side and said, "Hey, Mike, this is the balance sheet. This is a P&L. This is what happens when you make this decision. This is the effect that it actually has." And the reason why also developers and these people don't feel this sort of stuff is a lot of these buying decisions are micro buying decisions. Just about every workload is less than a cup of coffee. People I don't care. I mean, it's a cup of coffee. Who cares? We're a multi-billion-pound business. But it's the aggregation of all of those things that then builds up that creates the problem, right?
I think the reality is probably the first time a developer really comes, if I think of the Microsoft ecosystem, a lot of developers will get like partner credits or Visual Studio credits. And the first time they really think of that buy-in decision, not directly, but indirectly, is I've ran out of free credits. I can't do any work for the next few days, kind of thing. And I think that's kind of, obviously we need to shift that, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where, and it's been a bit of a hobby horse of mine for the last year, is a very sort of direct way of saying it is that we've got to start, as part of the educational journey of technologists and developers and all the people who work in the technology industry, to become more business and business finance literate than they are now. It's now part of the skill set that needs to be part of what people do. Now, I'm not suggesting that they have to go and do their accountancy, management accountancy exams or anything like that, but they've got to know which way's up when it comes to what that buying decision means. Because if we don't understand what the effects of that is, it means that we're not actually doing a well-architected framework. And the problem is the way in which things are educated in the well-architected framework of the hyperscalers is it doesn't talk about the financial bit. It talks about a technology efficiency, a technology performance, which infers a good financial outcome. Right. And that's not always the case, right? And then you put sustainability in the mix. Sometimes you're going to buy an instance that's more expensive than the equivalent one you've got at the moment, but it has less of a carbon impact in terms of scope 1 emissions, right? So it's about those trade-offs, and we've got to sort of look at that. And that's what I mean about challenging the norms in governance, because then now we've got to take a much more balanced and nuanced contextual view. This comes to a wider society point. We humans, we are demanding more and more this binary answer to everything. It's got to be black or white. It's got to be 1 or 0. It's got to be yes or no. That's not life. Life is about context and nuance. And that's now permeated right down to the absolute micro level in these on-demand technologies. Now, I'm focused on cloud. What about SaaS? Okay, now everyone have a good look at yourselves and have a really honest moment. How many of us have actually purchased software or services on our own credit card or on expenses, on the company credit card, for effect, to do something better for your own life and your own way of working? It might be a Canva license, for marketing and making some really nice visuals. It could be paying your own GitHub or Slack license, so you get the most out of those tools. Fundamentally, those choices are affecting the business, because if you're allocating those costs not in accepted areas, then they can't track the costs, and therefore the value is not being represented inside of the business. It also means the business doesn't understand the tools that it needs. The security risks, etc., etc. It goes on and goes on and goes on.
So I guess in that scenario, you're really sort of describing like the stealth purchase and procurement mechanism of
rogue IT.
There's
a thing of shadow IT. Shadow IT means we know where the money's come from. Someone spent it, we know where it's come from. We've just tolerated it not to be under control of something else. Right? This is genuinely rogue IT. People going out and doing things rogue. And that's another thing.
So another.
Go ahead, please.
Oh no, you keep going, Jez, because this is a good topic. I thought that might have been a good point to ask another question, but you keep going.
No, so I was going to flick to the second problem, because I'm really conscious of time, right? Because I could go on for this for hours, right? The second problem is a real business problem, right? It's the CapEx hangover. So if you've got an organization that has traditionally used capital expenditure for the way in which it purchases stuff, so I think you have big data centers, you have racks and racks and servers and all that sort of stuff, right? That's a big lumpy cost up front. And what they do is they use a bit of financial engineering and they amortize that over the following years. And it's all a bit of funny money, but it's the way how the accounting works. But the problem that creates is that when you buy a large capital purchase and then you put it into depreciation, i.e. that's spreading it over the years, then that depreciation sits in your budget. So then you've got a really interesting problem. You've done this big migration to cloud. You've still got your hangover of your capital expenditure. Your on-demand technology bills are going up, which means that the compression of what's left is squeezing out your ability to innovate, to do those new things with those other bits and bobs. Right? That spend compression, that's when you get the big shouts around about people hating on IT, right? Now, the last time I checked, the good definition of IT was, it wasn't a case of how quickly we did a resolution to a call. It's how many calls did we avoid and how satisfied are our users of the service we're delivering, right? So if we're not able to keep up, if we're not able to meet the demand, right? And how many people in their own lives are using things like ChatGPT, are using their own different types of SaaS software and that sort of thing in their own life? They now expect that as standard, right? This is table stakes. If you're behind that curve and you're unable to fund and invest in those things, that's where the problems come. This is why FinOps exists, right? Because FinOps is all about, frankly, in the initial stages, ripping out the waste in order to free up that budget to do it, but then also getting to the point of then avoiding cost, but measuring it from a business perspective that says, we understand the unit economic of every product that we put out there and whether it's providing value or not. And that could be a loss leader. When does a loss leader just turn simply into a loss? We've got to know. We've got to have those things in the right place, right? I think that's a really, and this is what I mean about that business literacy point for technologists that we've got to start understanding. What's the implication of what we're doing? At what point does our cool technology turn into actually a bit of a nightmare for somebody else? That's the question we've got to ask. Go ahead.
I was going to say, so one of the things you talked about a lot there is the kind of the value proposition of stuff to map it to the cost. And I think that's definitely one of the hardest parts, isn't it? Where, you said right at the start, one of the things I made a note of around give me more for less. But I think a lot of the times, a lot of people in businesses don't really know what more means. Give me more of what, and how do I measure whether I'm getting more of what I think it is? What's your thoughts on that and how that ties in?
I mean, so it's not always more for less. It's more for the same. or more with a small amount of investment.
Yeah.
The way I kind of look at it is that value gets measured in three ways, but not officially in three ways. So the most important one is the one that doesn't get measured, but actually is the thing that drives a lot of behavior, and that's emotion. Kind of people feel about things, because humans are humans. If you look at various behavioral economic theorems and the rest of it, actually emotion, confirmation bias, affirmation bias, loss aversion, those types of things are driven by emotion and not logic.
Yeah.
Then you've got the cost benefit, which is the easy one, to measure, and a lot of people go for that. But then there's also the value benefit. What value is it doing? So if you take, for example, I'll pick one at random, passports, right? That if we introduce a set of automation that is a tenth of the cost it would be to do it manually, yes, we can measure the cost benefit analysis of that really easily to make more passports quicker. But the value on that is that we are turning around and we are reducing the amount of time of passports being delivered to people by a certain amount of period, creating greater customer satisfaction.
Yeah.
Right. Those are two different measures, really different measures. But
So I think it's fascinating that you bring up the emotion bit, actually, because I think it's so important as well when you, like, I've really seen that in slightly different areas, but actually it's really the perception people have about the other measures that you're talking about there can be really influenced by that emotional aspect. So as a FinOps person, if I can just communicate better what the story is about the cost and the different value measures, if I create a feeling where the user feels like, actually, I'm happy with this, then they kind of care a bit less specifically about the numbers, whether they're good or bad in a way, don't they? And it can have a trade on where if I feel good about something, I'll do more of it, which actually makes those numbers better anyway. And, if we think about, like, in terms of application adoption by users, so, things like your Canva example, if I had a choice between a couple of different tools and I chose Canva and the users really like using it, they're going to use it more. So then you get more value in marketing out of it, even though it may have cost you slightly more than another tool that they don't use as much, isn't it?
But that's where your negotiation of the contracts, when you get that economies of scale and all that sort of stuff coming from a SaaS ITAM point of view, right? But I think there's another part about that emotional bit that we're sort of tapping into, is also technology has moved on so much. I mean, if those people who are of an age, above 40 years old, who've been in technology for pretty much most of their career, what they started on to what they're using today and what they're dealing with today is galaxies apart. You got people who are in leadership positions who literally grew up on single-use applications, mainframes, basic, data centers, racks and such, where you bought servers for single things, without even any of the whole virtualization piece, which I know for probably some of your younger listeners sounds absolutely insane, but it's true. Right now, we're living in a very amorphous world of where you've got on-demand resources that can stretch outward, upward, downward, inward. They float back into themselves. Also, and then you add complicated purchasing methods for discounts over the top of it. The whole thing is really, really complex. So that mind shift is taken a while. And when people are in conflict, when they don't know something, they will retreat back to their last known position, the place where they're safe. So sometimes, when we're on that FinOps conversation, that emotional part of the FinOps conversation, people are going to naturally go back to where they feel safe, because they feel they can argue their case at that point. Because otherwise, what you're doing is just coming along and berating people for being rubbish, right? That's no way to get cultural change to happen. It's about taking people on a journey. It's about educating, empowering, enabling people, to be able to make that mindset shift, to be able to consider cost and carbon as part of their thinking in decision-making cycles, right? So that, and that really goes, but that links actually to the third point I was going to make, which is about, the governance on net zero shifts. Because now we're in a world of where if you want to be more green, that means you've got to consume less. So I've got a real beef with the term net zero, because net zero in its truest form means we stop breathing, we stop eating, we stop drinking, we take off all of our clothes, and then stop breathing completely, and when we die, we don't decompose. That's net zero. Right? Obviously, pragmatically, net zero also means offsetting and that sort of stuff, and there's a whole bunch of problems that sits underneath that. But it means that the governance around that needs to shift. We need to make pragmatic trade-off choices between performance of technology, the cost of that, and the sustainability angles to that, right? And every time you make a trade-off, you're going to pull one lever, another lever is going to go up. And it's trying to get into that sort of Goldilocks zone. That's kind of where we're going to talk about it, right? And I think fundamentally, those three problems are not technology problems. They are business problems and they're cultural problems. And when you have those conversations one-on-one with clients, when I have these conversations one-on-one with clients, there has to be a certain amount of psychological safety that goes with that says, you are not alone, right? This is a massive problem for everybody.
Yeah.
And this is a real challenge to people's sort of identity about who they are, about their professional standards, the rest of it, because suddenly you're saying, you run the risk of saying, well, you're business illiterate, you're financially illiterate, you're carbon illiterate, and you just make really bad emotional decisions. That's no way to cause change. That's no way how you're going to
change. Well, it comes back to the emotional thing, doesn't it? You're going to really put everybody's yeah.
It's about giving people that journey, and encouraging them to be successful. So that's where all that sort of stuff comes from. But really conscious of the time. I know you're going to turn around and say, well, go on then, how do you fix it?
Mind reader. Well, actually, to be honest, my thought when you've been talking through this was, I think there's going to be a really good opportunity for a FinOps therapist to sit people down.
That's actually what FinOps is.
Yeah,
right? Yeah. I mean, I have jokingly said, and also seriously said, that if everyone did the well-architected framework right from the very beginning, in its truest sense, then FinOps would never exist.
Mm.
But the reality is that the bit that I was missing from all of that was that has a base assumption that everybody who does the well-architected framework has been educated and empowered and enabled to make business and finance decisions at a micro level.
Mm.
But that cultural element hasn't happened in many, many organizations, right? So that's why FinOps exists. When it comes really down to it. So FinOps is a people game. It is 80% people, 10% transformation, 10% widgets.
Yeah.
And that's why if you want to take pragmatic steps on how to deal with this stuff, the first thing I would do is enhance and embed FinOps and GreenOps into the operating model of the organization, right? And make carbon and cost part of design thinking. You could put a slogan on that and call it shift left on cost and carbon. Right? By shifting left and bringing it further up the value chain, of how you're going to deploy workloads and capabilities out there, or the selection stuff, tooling, that sort of stuff, means that we can make better informed decisions. Means we don't have to go back and fix it. If you think about the FTE effort, the amount of distraction it takes away from DevOps teams, in their sprints, that they have to create a sprint to go and clean up the mess, stuff like that. It's just bringing inefficiency into the system. So, let's eliminate that inefficiency, as far left as possible. But that also means we have to change the value paradigm. And what do I mean by that? It means that we need to look at the bill in a different way, because the cloud bill will always go up. The SaaS bill will always ultimately end up going up, because as they add more features, premium features like AI and all the other bits and bobs in, right? The bill is going to go up. And also with organizations changing their billing model to much more OpEx-led style billing models and subscription-based models, it's going to go up. So we've got to make sure that the growth of that bill is lower than the increase of value. That's how success is achieved. And that value can be a cost value and a business value. And that's where we've got to look at both. You can't do it just in isolation on one. You've got to put the context of these things together. There might be something that's horrifically expensive. And I'll tell a genuine story. there was the worst workload I have ever seen in my life running at a payments company. It was awful. It was costing an absolute boatload of money. But I said, look, we could save 200K a year off this if we change and re-architect this to this thing, right? Really simple change. I went, yes, Jez, great. But if we do that, we break the regulators' rules on how it connects to their system and how they measure stuff. And that results in a $250 million fine. Right? Okay, fine. We're leaving it as it is. We're not going anywhere. We'll burn the cash. Right? And then we'll burn the cash to avoid an even bigger cost problem. Right? And it's taking that context, that nuance. That's why we're always going to be curious about it. And that leads to the third pragmatic step forward, which is about you've got to get transparency and observability. You've got to actively monitor and forecast that on-demand technology spend and measure it in terms of its business value. Right? These things are so intertwined, and this is that whole soup, to end. People say soup to nuts, it's soup to cheese, really. Or soup to dessert, right? The way where you actually have to look at this whole thing and say, well, where does it sit? Because if there are tools out there on the market which you could use, which we partner with, where actually, if you look at the entire business value chain, there'll be some workloads which are really chunky, really meaty, and they're overspecced, which actually you could dial down on and they could run slower because other parts down the line go slower anyway. So you could smooth it all out.
Yeah.
So it's about the total efficiency of the value chain as well. So it's not just in individual workloads. We've got to get that transparency and observability throughout the entire process to understand it, and then we can measure its value properly. Right? That's hard, right? It is hard, but it starts with transparency and observability. And and where this comes to the last pragmatic step, where it really, really starts is by promoting ownership. Back to that cultural, that emotional part. If we have an adapted level of responsibility towards that type of consumption, and we foster that into an end-to-end model, where people do feel that empowerment, that enablement to be able to make those right buying decisions, be able to justify them, that they've been given the education to understand why they're making that decision, they can justify it, then that adapted level of responsibility means that the governance model, yes, absolutely changes and shifts, but actually you're making a better set of decisions overall than you would do by doing it in a centralized way. Because then we end up making arbitrary decisions which hurt us, for the sake of the common good, the least worst option. And that goes back to that context and nuance bit. So those are the four things I would really say that you can do to take this forward. Shifting left on carbon and cost, changing the value paradigm, getting transparency and observability, and really promoting that ownership.
Do you think, in your experience, Jez, with the ownership bit, I guess when we loop the ownership back to the emotion bit, you kind of want to get to that point, don't you, where the team that owns the app owns the cost, but actually you want them to be proud that the cost and value for their application is really good, and you've got, maybe we've got that Goldilocks zone. Do you see that happen very often in the field?
Well, so yeah, absolutely. So those organizations that truly adopt product operating models, where those teams are genuinely delivering an end-to-end product, then yeah, absolutely. And I worked with a parcel delivery company who started that journey and went a long, long way towards getting there. And the shift was absolutely massive because we actually got to a point of where we knew the unit cost per parcel.
Right.
And I know this sounds ridiculous, but it's absolutely true. We knew that the AWS cost per parcel was a fraction of a thousandth of a cent, right? But actually, we brought it down by 0.02 of a cent, right, from where it was. And lots of people are like, we don't care. And I said, you do when you're delivering 900 million parcels a year.
Yeah.
Right? Because the aggregation of that then suddenly goes up. And I can see people doing maths going, wow, but that's only like a couple, just shy of a million or hundreds of K or something like that. But yeah, but actually wasn't the number that mattered. What really mattered was the business efficiency it brought in other parts of the supply chain, the business value chain that it brought, because they were able to process them quicker. We reduced the cost by being more efficient, and it actually elevated the value of the organization by $25 million in a quarter.
Yeah,
increase the value of the business by $25 million in a quarter.
And that's what was that? That was 0.002 of a cent per parcel. Yeah, it's quite amazing, that really, isn't it?
Yeah, and this is what I mean about that aggregation point, right? This is really, really important. And so, we started the story with, what's the cost of the click? Actually, the journey is asking ourselves and being open about what's the cost of the click to knowing the cost of the click. And that's sort of a cost, carbon, and value perspective.
So what? I think we're just coming up to 30 minutes, Jez. This has been fascinating listening to you talk through some of this. I love all the examples you've put in as well. And for the audience, what's the one thing you want people to take away from the chat we've just had? That they, where should they go and learn more about your stuff, and what do you want them to think as a takeaway action?
So there's loads and loads of things you can go and learn about FinOps, right? So it's all out there. I'm not suggesting that everyone should go off and become a FinOps practitioner or a FinOps professional, right? But I genuinely would say the most successful people in technology going forward are those that genuinely learn business and the basic fundamentals of finance. Yeah, knowing what does EBIT mean, and why does it matter? What's the difference between a P&L and a balance sheet? What's the difference between OPEX and CapEx? Simple stuff. What does WACC mean? Things like that. Understanding those things means that when you make those buying decisions, you have at least an understanding about the implications of what you're doing. Now, at a very, very minor level, it's going to be minuscule and it's not going to change the price of fish. The needle's not really going to move. But the higher you go, the higher the needle will move. And people always find it nuts that the most successful conversations I have are with finance folk and CFOs when I say, what if I could change your EBIT and move it positively by 0.5%, would you buy it? And they would sell their grandma to do it. Now, you said that to a technology, like, improve something by 0.5%. Okay.
I guess it comes back to your example, though, doesn't it? Because it's the developers and the IT people don't understand the compound effect, isn't it? So that 0.002 of a cent, developers like, so what? The CFO sees the big picture, and it's that 25 million or whatever it was that it moved by.
Yeah,
and it's kind of how do we teach the developer to understand the compound consequences of that tiny buy-in decision that you've made?
Absolutely right. And weirdly enough, when you start doing that sort of stuff, all the fun stuff that we used to be able to do, travel, go and have office parties, go and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Guess what? That cash flow starts to exist again because we're removing the waste outside of the organization, right? That value is being brought. We're able to enable growth. We're eliminating the waste. It means that margins improve. It means our cash flow improves as a business. That means we can have the fun stuff back again.
Yeah, hire more people to do more jobs that you're not, you wish you could do, or train people more and all the good stuff.
Or be able to buy that AI project, and be able to afford to pay for that AI project that's going to do the work of 5 or 6 FTEs in a fraction of the time, and also freeing you up from mundane tasks so you can go and do the cool stuff.
Yeah.
We've got to change our attitude towards it. Of this is not a transactional relationship, right? This is about trade-offs. About what can I do? How can I help you to help me to help you to help me to help you? Kind of exchange of stuff, and that virtuous circle. The more you do it, the more people will notice you in the business of being. You're a savvy operator. You know what you're talking about. You've got kung fu skills that we don't have. We want you part of our, of what we want to do. And then, I'll tell a story. I won't say the chap's name. Really, really good guy. He got serious about this stuff and he started learning. And he learned really hard and really fast. As a result, inside of the organization, he was the only technical guy that people wanted for the really cool projects.
Yeah, because it's that thing about becoming the person who the business trusts to spend their money well, isn't it? That's the emotion you want the business people to feel.
Not
and then
just
you get
their money well, but actually to challenge back, on the crazy and say, look, I love this idea. This is a fantastic idea, and I'd love to do it. But you do understand that the cost to run, the cost to serve this thing, we're going to rapidly lose the benefit of that, and it's going to cost us a lot of money, and we're not going to get the margin we want. There is another way we could do this of where we're going to get the margin. It's not going to be quite so sexy, but it's going to do the job that we need. And going back to my very first career, being in the armed forces on tanks, one of the first things it actually says in the manual is use the correct tools correctly. We've got to do that, and those tools, they're not necessarily spanners and hammers, right? Those tools are also business vehicles, financial vehicles that we use to make our decision, whether we put things on capital expenditure, whether we put things on operational expenditure, how those things are then managed, whether put on prepayments, and be able to have that informed conversation with our finance colleagues, with our procurement colleagues, with other technologists, with the business, with app owners, with product owners. We've got to get out of our towers. We've got to get out of our silos and actually build relationships. And that's how your career is going to launch.
Jez, that's brilliant. Thank you very much for joining us today. And
my pleasure, Mike.
What's the best way if anybody wants to connect with you after watching the podcast? How do you like people to connect with you?
You can hit me up on LinkedIn. Very easy to find. Just put in Jez Back, JEZBACK. It's probably the easiest way. I don't do the other social medias. I have accounts, but I don't ever look at them. Just hit me up that way is the easiest way to find it.
Awesome. Thank you again, Jez.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.